Amen. Thank you, Herb. Really appreciate that. We're going to be in Song of Solomon all morning, so if you'll go ahead and open to Song of Solomon, chapter 8. I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint special effects, but I thought that this would be fitting to do a little flame image here on each opening screen as we talk about igniting intimacy in marriage. Song of Solomon 8. Verses 6 and 7, as you're turning there, I'll take this time, of course, to welcome our visitors. So happy that you're here. Give us a chance to get to know you, stick around after services. Just so delighted that you put God first today and that you've come to be with us. And let's read verses 6 and 7 in chapter 8. Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. I'm so glad that Adam read from Ephesians 5 this morning. It is such a beautiful passage to describe the marriage relationship as a model of Christ's relationship with the church is just so profound, and there's so much depth in that passage. But I must confess to you a fear that I have. It may be that since most sermons that we have heard about marriage come straight out of Ephesians 5, and that's the main passage, my fear is that some Christians view marriage as nothing more than a duty or an obligation. Husbands, you must be sacrificial like Christ was sacrificial for the church. And wives, you must submit the way the church submits to Christ. And maybe we come away after years and years of hammering away on just that particular passage when it comes to marriage, that we have an imbalanced view of what marriage is all about. And for some, maybe even the intimacy of the one flesh union in marriage seems like nothing more than a duty. I've been so refreshed by our study of the Song of Solomon because there is absolutely nothing in this book about duty or obligation. It pictures marriage as beautiful, passionate, pleasurable, fun, exciting, intimate, enjoyable. And the love between a husband and wife is like an unquenchable flame that flashes like lightning from heaven. There's nothing in the Song of Solomon about obligatory romance. And if you feel that that is all there is to your life in marriage, the Song of Solomon is for you, because it'll help you ignite the flames of intimacy in your marriage. From the Song of Solomon, let's consider 10 ways to ignite intimacy in marriage. First of all, realize that God is pro-intimacy. He is in favor of physical intimacy in marriage. In fact, He's so in favor of it, He created it. He's so in favor of it, He gave us an entire book in the Bible celebrating the physical and emotional intimacy between husbands and wives. In fact, if you look in Song of Solomon chapter 5 and verse 1, this is on their honeymoon night. In verse 1, the man says, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh along with my balsam. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, friends, drink, and imbibe deeply, O lovers. It is God's will for you as a married couple to eat, friends, to drink, and imbibe deeply, O lovers. And I will tell you, this is a challenge for many Christians. One woman, of course she was being figurative here, but one woman said she felt like God had to leave the room when she and her husband were intimate. She speaks as if God is ashamed of the very thing that He created and called good and beautiful. This woman has obviously not read or thought about the implications of Proverbs 5:19, where it says, as a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times, be exhilarated always with her love. That doesn't sound like duty at all, nor does it sound like God is anti-intimacy in marriage. In fact, Adam set me up well for this with his lesson last week about enjoying the blessings of life, because in Ecclesiastes 9, verse 9, it says, enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life. Intimacy in marriage is a reward and a great gift from God that's meant to be enjoyed. Now, I left a lot of blank space on your outlines, because I'm going to be very practical in this lesson, and there may be some things that really stand out to you that you feel like you need to write down, so I just wanted to leave a lot of space. Physical intimacy between spouses is not dirty. It's not bad. It's not something only men enjoy, but it's just a wifely duty for women. It's not something to be used only for the purpose of conceiving children. It's not something God is ashamed of. It's not something only worldly people do or talk about. It's something God talks about. It's something God designed. It's something God gave us as a beautiful reward to enjoy, and it's something God celebrates in His Word. So the first step to igniting intimacy is to celebrate and call good what God has called good. Secondly, have eyes for no one else. Chapter 8, verse 6. Chapter 8, verse 6, we just read the very first part. She says, put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. She wants to be a seal of ownership over his heart because he belongs to her, she belongs to him. And you see this possessive language all throughout the book. Look back in chapter 6 in verse 3. She says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine, he who pastures his flock among the lilies. She says this 3 times in the book. He's mine. He belongs to me. She belongs to him. And then when he describes her, he says this back in chapter 2, verse 2. He says of her, like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the maidens. In other words, all other women are like thorns compared to you. He had eyes for no one else. It's so important for igniting intimacy in marriage that neither of you have any doubt or suspicion that your spouse might be romantically interested in someone else. And there are very practical ways to help assure one another that you have eyes for no one else. First of all, for instance, husbands, you can refuse to meet with women alone without your wife under any circumstance, and vice versa. Not only does that safeguard you against temptation, just setting that rule in place in your house assures the other spouse that they are the only ones for you and that you don't even want them thinking about the possibility or hint that you might be interested in someone else. Secondly, husbands and wives can set filters on all their computers and smartphones. Even if you don't think it's a temptation for you to look at explicit content online, set a filter anyway because it says to your spouse, my eyes are for you and for you alone. And if it really isn't a temptation for you, you won't have a problem putting filters on, will you? And thirdly, and this is something I'll leave up to your judgment, but I think it's worth discussing. If something happens, like maybe someone comes onto you in the workplace and you find yourself tempted by this person, don't hide that from your spouse. It may be hard, but it's best to be transparent and say, for instance, look, this woman came onto me and I admit to you she's physically attractive. But my eyes are only for you. Compared to you, she is a thorn. And so I'm going to tell this woman her behavior is inappropriate because I am happily married and I'm going to purposely avoid encounters with this woman or any opportunity that would present itself as something questionable. Some married couples think the opposite. They think, well, I got to hide that stuff. But temptation thrives in the dark. It's much healthier. Get it out in the open so you can work together with your spouse to make sure you know you belong only to each other. Thirdly, dwell on what's wonderful about your husband. I have no illusion that sparks will always be flying in your marriage. Even in the Song of Solomon, there was a time when their love life was on the rocks. But what's important when intimacy is fading is to remind yourself why you got married in the first place. To remind yourself to be thankful for your spouse. In chapter 5, we see that there has been tension in their marriage, and we don't have the specifics. I think it's purposely vague. That's the beauty of the figurative language, because so many things can cause tension and can come between you and your spouse and your love life. And yet the key to them getting back together was when her friends asked her in verse 9, what kind of beloved is your beloved? O most beautiful among women? What kind of beloved is your beloved that thus you adjure us? And then she takes time. She takes stock in verses 10 through 16 about all the wonderful things about her beloved. It's really easy to dwell on all the negative things about your beloved. Get hung up on all the things he or she does to annoy you, what he did to make you mad that day, what he didn't do or she didn't do to make you mad that day, the little habits that drive you crazy. But if you can take the time to focus on and dwell on the wonderful things about your beloved, it'll help you see why you love this person in spite of their flaws. Despite their flaws. Write these qualities down. Think about them every day. Give thanks to God that your spouse has these wonderful qualities. Gratitude for one another is a great way to ignite intimacy. Also, forgive what's not so wonderful. Back in chapter 5, it seems in verse 2, it says that she was asleep, her heart was awake, and her beloved comes to her. But then in verse 3, she says, I've taken off my dress. How can I put it on again? I've washed my feet. How can I dirty them again? And my beloved extended his hand through the opening, and my feelings were aroused for him. It seems at first she wasn't interested in being intimate with him for whatever reason. We don't know why, but there was definitely conflict there. But what we do see is that she eventually regretted it, and her feelings for him returned. And she went to go seek him out. I'm going to give you a verse that we usually don't connect with the bedroom, but think about this verse in the context of marital intimacy. Paul says in Ephesians 4, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. It's really hard to be intimate with someone you're bitter against and angry at. In another interesting verse, right there in the same context, verse 26, he says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. He's saying, don't go to bed angry. Solve the problem before it festers and gets worse. Forgive one another and don't bring bitterness, anger, and strife into the marriage bed. Forgiveness may be the strongest aphrodisiac there is. Number 5, give and believe compliments. The Song of Solomon is pretty sappy. It reminds me of the classic line, one of the many classic lines in The Princess Bride, when the grandfather, he starts to read the story to his son, and then his grandson, and his grandson says, hold it. Is this a kissing book? Song of Solomon is a kissing book. It's lovebirds. They're just giving each other compliments back and forth. I love you. Oh yeah, no, but I love you more. We see one example of this in chapter 1, verse 15 and 16. He says, how beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves. And then she responds in verse 16, well, how handsome you are, my beloved, and so pleasant, and our couch is luxuriant. While it may seem kind of sappy, compliments are fuel for the fires of intimacy, because it helps reassure your spouse that you delight in them and that you have eyes for no one else. Both the husband and the wife in every marriage have insecurities about themselves, whether it's about how they look, whether it's about how they're performing at work, or how they're performing intimately. And when you give compliments to one another, it makes the person feel so good and safe and secure about themselves that they can release the shame and give themselves to you more freely. And it's important to believe compliments. Because if every time a spouse gives a compliment, the other person just shuts it down and says, oh, you're just saying that, or, how could anyone be attracted to me? Eventually the compliments will stop. That'll get old, because you're essentially accusing your spouse of lying. And when those compliments stop, the fires of intimacy will die down. You see, the reason the woman in the Song of Solomon felt so beautiful was not because she thought she was the most attractive woman around, but because she believed his compliments. Let me say it this way. She may not have been the most attractive woman around, but she absolutely believed she was the most attractive woman to her husband. And that's all that mattered to her. And here's the tip. Be specific and creative with your compliments. In the Song of Solomon, they didn't just say, well, you look nice. And he said, oh, well, you look great. They were very specific. Chapter 4, he specifically praises 7 parts of her body. Then in chapter 7, he praises 10 parts of her body, all in unique ways. And then she does the same for him in chapter 6. So don't just say you look nice. Tell her what specifically it is about her that looks nice. Tell him what specifically about him looks great. And tell her how looking at her and being married to her makes you feel. You can also find creative ways to give compliments. Like, it doesn't just have to be verbal. You can put Post-it notes all over the house randomly. You can send text messages to each other throughout the week. You can even involve your kids. You can whisper in your daughter's ear, "Go tell Daddy I think he's the greatest." And then he can whisper back in her ear, and she'll go and bring that message back to her dad. Or pick a flower for your wife. Have one of your kids deliver it for you. It's a wonderful thing. A wonderful thing for your children to see you doting on each other, complimenting each other, smiling and winking at each other across the room. It makes your children feel safe and secure in your home, and it's just a great way to ignite intimacy with your spouse in the process. 6th, use intimacy to heal, not to hurt. In chapter 5 again, it seems like, again, she's withholding intimacy for some reason. Again, we don't know the reasons why, but because it's figurative, I think it allows room to fill in our own reasons, because there are many. And I want to address this particular thing that is common, I think, perhaps all too common. You see it a lot in the world. Sometimes women will withhold intimacy as a weapon to get back at their husbands. And I'm not saying that husbands never do that, but it seems like it's more common among women. Instead of having a forgiving heart, she uses her body as a tool to punish him. She can sometimes hold it over her husband's head as if it's a reward he has to earn, or she might threaten to withhold intimacy unless he meets certain conditions and gives her what she wants. This is a terrible wickedness. It is an abomination to God to take the beauty of the one flesh union that is meant to strengthen the bond between a husband and wife and use it to drive a wedge between the two of you. And if it goes on long enough, listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, "Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." When a husband and wife are depriving each other, not only does it erode their relationship, but Satan will take advantage of that and may have the spouses turn to someone else for intimacy that they're not getting. Or may have the spouse turn to the internet for intimacy that they're not getting. And let me give you something really challenging to think about. I have to be careful how I balance this. But in the same context, in this same chapter, a few verses earlier, Paul says this: the husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. Now, you know and I know, over the centuries, this has been twisted and perverted to where maybe a husband says, "I don't really care how you feel. It is your duty to be intimate with me." Or he may even pull out Ephesians 5 and twist that too and say, "Well, you must submit to me because that's what Ephesians 5 says." That's not love at all. That's not what the Scriptures teach at all. But it is still an obligation. It is still a duty. So consider this. Sometimes the need for intimacy should trump our feelings. Sometimes you need to be intimate with one another even when things aren't going well between you. Even if you're having an argument or disagreement about something, instead of cutting each other off from intimacy simply because you don't feel like being intimate with one another, you may need to be intimate anyway despite your feelings, because that intimacy can heal the hurt between you and bring you closer together despite the issues you're facing. Scientific studies are clear that intimacy releases chemicals in the brain that bond you to your spouse. And when you use intimacy to heal and not to hurt, what it shows the two of you is that your marriage is bigger than your problems. It shows that you are unwilling to let any problems destroy your blessed union before God. Seventh, make intimacy a priority. In chapter 7, verses 10 through 13, that's where she invites him. She says, come away with me. Let's go out into the countryside. Let's go out into the village and just be alone, and that's where I'll be intimate with you. You know, it may sound a little mechanical to schedule alone time and intimacy, but many couples find if they don't make it a priority and put it on the calendar, it's going to be tough for it to happen. People like to think that it'll just happen spontaneously, but by the time you've finished the million other things on your schedule, one or both of you is absolutely exhausted at the end of the day. So schedule weekend trips away together, maybe. Maybe hire a babysitter to watch the kids for a few hours. How about this, even during the day, when you both still have energy? Go on dates together. Dress up nice for those dates. Go on marriage retreats. Schedule alone time. Put it on your calendar. Number 8, remove the foxes. Back in chapter 2, verse 15, she says, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that are ruining the vineyards while our vineyards are in blossom. And in this context, it seems that foxes are anything that gets in the way of intimacy. You have to, as spouses, talk about the foxes. You got to catch them. You got to remove them. And here are some examples, getting very practical here. Some examples of foxes. Maybe one or both of you has sinned against the other, and there's no repentance there. There's no humility. There's no attempt at apology or trying to reconcile. That's a fox that needs to be removed. Maybe you just don't understand each other. Maybe you don't understand the difference between men and women and how they operate and how they think, and that's causing you problems. You're just not communicating well. Maybe you're both way too busy, or one of you is way too busy. Maybe intimacy is not enjoyable because you've not been open with each other about your needs. Maybe intimacy is not enjoyable because one or both of you has a conscience issue with what you are doing. Intimacy is not enjoyable, perhaps, because one of you was sexually abused when you were younger, and now you're totally cold and closed off. Intimacy might be difficult because one of you is not showering or brushing your teeth enough. Intimacy is difficult because one of you is insecure, so insecure about how your body looks. Intimacy is not possible, perhaps, because your kids can come and go as they please in and out of your bedroom anytime, and you don't have any privacy. Or maybe intimacy is difficult because you have needs, but you're too ashamed or embarrassed to talk to your spouse about those needs. Whatever the foxes are that are ruining the vineyard of your marriage bed, they need to be brought to light. Lay it all out on the table with your spouse. And be honest about what's coming between you so that you can work together to solve the problem. You can pray together about it. You can ask God to remove the foxes and to ignite the fires of intimacy in your marriage. You may even seek additional counsel. It may be that you go to our shepherds and ask them for wisdom about how to remove the foxes from your love life. That may seem kind of awkward and difficult, I understand. But you should never be ashamed about seeking help to ignite the intimacy God designed you to enjoy. Ninth, develop a code language. Pretty much the entire Song of Solomon is written in code language, using imagery from nature to describe their intimacy. Many couples feel weird and awkward talking about intimacy, even with each other, because they aren't sure what kind of vocabulary to use. If their language is too clinical and technical, it totally kills the romance and mood. If their language is too crude or graphic, it also kills the romance and mood and makes you feel guilty because, hey, that's how the world talks. That's not how Christians talk. So it might be good to develop your own code language with each other. You could even use language from the Song of Solomon about vineyards and gardens and fruit. You could create, like a hand signal where you and your spouse know that it's time for intimacy. One couple I read about had 2 candles, and when one was ready for intimacy, they'd light one of those candles. And then if the other one was ready, they'd go and they'd light the other candle. And it would just be a signal between the two of them. They knew. And when you have that code language, well, it's kind of exciting because it's a language only the two of you know. It keeps things more mysterious and romantic. It helps you to open up to each other and communicate specifically about your needs without using language that might kill the mood. And it also helps you use discretion around your kids, right? It's good to flirt around your kids, but there are things that obviously should not be happening in the presence of your children. And yet in this code language, you can actually be flirting and fanning the flames of intimacy with your spouse right in front of them, and they have no idea what you're talking about. And finally, make your bedroom an oasis. Chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, she says, our couch, our bed is luxuriant. And she describes their dwelling place not just as made out of cedar and cypresses, but she speaks as if they're surrounded by actual cedars and by actual cypresses. She views their bed and their home as being a place of love out in the woods, surrounded by trees. And all throughout the book, that language is employed. She invites him out into the woods. She invites her out to the countryside. They're not really being literal about that, but they're describing what it's like to be alone together, away from the hustle and bustle of city life, out in their own little oasis. If you want to ignite intimacy in marriage, make your bedroom an oasis where you can both get away with each other alone from the problems of life. You can do that in a couple ways. You can do that by physically transforming the room. Many times, since house guests don't typically go into people's bedrooms, the bedroom can become the messiest room in the house. But that's not romantic at all. And in fact, if you went on your honeymoon, or you went on a getaway with your wife and you went to rent a hotel room for the evening, and the hotel room looked like your bedroom, would it kill things? If so, why does your bedroom look like that? It's probably killing things at home too, even though you just kind of get used to it. Now, what is very clear in the Song of Solomon, you can't read this without getting this point. Intimacy involves all of the senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. So why not make the bedroom an inviting place that physically engages the senses? Why not work extra hard to keep the bedroom immaculate, to keep clean, fresh, crisp sheets on the bed, to put a fresh coat of paint on the walls if need be? I read maybe get a little fountain that makes the sound of water running over rocks, or maybe even get one of those machines that simulates the sound of the ocean. Why not put out scented candles or keep some chocolate by the bed? You can also do it by emotionally transforming the room. You can set ground rules with your children that that's mom and dad's room and you're not allowed to go in without knocking and getting permission to enter first. You can set ground rules with each other about how you're going to make the bedroom a place of forgiveness and healing, not bitterness. Some have even designated a separate room in the house, right? They say, okay, if we have problems, we have disagreements, we're going into that room and we're going to hash it out. And we're just going to air all of our grievances, and that's where we're going to do all of our fighting and arguing. But once we go into the bedroom, we're leaving all of that stuff out because it's our oasis. You know, before this sermon, you may have thought the only guidance for igniting intimacy were the fashion magazines in the checkout line at the grocery store. And I am so grateful to God that that is not the case. In His Word, God speaks to all issues of life, and His wisdom reaches even into the bedroom. So may God strengthen, ignite, and fan the flames of intimacy in your marriage. Will you take out your songbooks, please? It's interesting, the language that God uses in Genesis 4 to describe the intimacy between Adam and Eve. He says that Adam knew his wife. He knew her. That's the literal word in the Hebrew, is to know her. And that same language is used throughout Scripture about knowing God. And Adam hinted about this in his Lord's Supper talk, that ultimately the intimacy that God wants, yes, is between spouses, but really He wants us to know Him. So 2 questions. How is your intimacy with your spouse? Hopefully you were thinking about that during this lesson. But the more important question is, how is your intimacy with God? Do you know him intimately? Jesus came to die on a cross so that you could know him, so that you could be saved, and you could rejoice in this wonderful relationship with him. If you're not a Christian, you can become one by believing in him and being baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. And if you've done that already, but like Song of Solomon chapter 5, there's tension in your intimacy with the Lord. There's problems there. I guarantee you the problem is not with the Lord. And if the problem is with you this morning, we're here to help you resolve that problem, to pray with you and for you. And if you need to repent, come forward. Let us know how your intimacy with God can be restored while we stand and sing.